Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 906, Strategies of the Red. The portals faded with the death of the bone dragon, and a huge cheer went up from the villagers. Today was a resounding victory. Not a single orc had been lost, and the village walls hadn't been breached. The red dragon flew back to land in the village, then transformed back into her human form. Tessa came down from Thor's back, still wearing her dragon armor skill, and in dragonkin form, fully scaled with a long red tail. She clasped her hands in a formal military greeting and bowed to the dragon. Avatar, it is an honor to meet you. The dragon smiled at her. You may all call me Priestess Delilah. I was never one for formality outside of combat. Overlord Carl, thank you for that defensive skill. It made today's work a particular joy. Sister Tessa, you have the most wonderful mount as a companion. Don't let him escape you. Now that I have everyone's attention, I will brief you all on the situation. Lord Bomgan recently suffered a defeat at the hands of the Lord of Drod, which cost a huge portion of their fleet's wealth, as well as the permanent death of more than one of the senior lieutenants under him. Following that, there was an incident where a totem-ranked Lich Lord was defeated and his phylactery destroyed. Now, with repeated defeats along the border, the intensity of the battles has been increasing by the day, and it is suspected that the Bomgan nation is gearing up for a full invasion. Your strategy of having them sacrifice as many of the lower undead as possible was a brilliant strategic move, as without the bodies, it will be difficult for the Bomgan army to replace their losses, but the size of their amassed hordes is still staggering. Dana smirked at Carl, and Ophelia rumbled with laughter as Tessa cleared her throat. Priestess Delilah, I believe we might be somewhat responsible for this situation. We were at the defeat of the Bomgan fleets in Drod. The Lich Lord whose phylactery was lost was also us. Now, I can't claim that we were more than a drop in the bucket of the undead lost along the border, but we are still here, Tessa explained. The ancient red dragon let out a very undignified giggle. No wonder the goddess favors you. Your companions have the laughing god's own luck when it comes to being in the right place at the wrong time. But it is good that I found you now. There will be a massive increase in attacks beginning later today, driven partially by the loss of the bone dragon and his armies. What many don't know about the undead nation is that while their numbers seem limitless, with the ability to keep creating more undead, that is only true for the hordes. The zombies, the skeletons, the wights, and the ghouls. For the stronger creatures and the spiritual undead, the numbers are much more limited. So, every loss of a powerful necromancer, or greater undead with the ability to summon or create an undying plague, is a great blow to their ability to sustain their numbers during a prolonged conflict. They lost at least a few overlord-ranked necromancers here today. I saw the bodies. That means they're going to be out for revenge, and they've got a whole army staged nearby where they can open portals with minimal effort. Carl had forgotten about that little detail. Sure, you could open a portal to anywhere that you knew, but the amount of mana increased with the size and the distance. So, it was more efficient to keep the army near the border that you were attacking, and then only send them 50 or 100 kilometers to attack. So, what do you want us to do? I'm hoping that you have some sort of plan because ours was just fly to wherever there are undead, and I am beginning to suspect that isn't going to cut it. Carl asked. The dragon gave him an indulgent smile, which only enhanced her motherly appearance, but something behind the smile triggered all the warning bells in Carl's head that said this was an intrigued predator. That was a new experience for him. Normally, there wasn't much in the world that would give him a sense of threat, and certainly not such a motherly smile. However, her next words reminded Carl that this was a red dragon, a totem-ranked follower of the dragon god of war. You know, that's not a bad plan either. We could just fly over to them and start a fight instead of waiting to see where they show up. With those combat buffs that you have, we could probably hold out for at least 2 hours. It would be glorious. She agreed. Kara landed beside Carl and stood up on her back legs to assume a boxing stance, which made the dragon priestess laugh. Her tone was as amused as the smile on her face as the dragon continued. Well, that's another vote for just going over and punching them in the face. However, that could just make things worse for everyone else. The undead aren't all centralized in one location. They have been found stalking hordes of lesser undead in 4 different locations, one of which suffered heavy damage during the battle tonight, as someone from this battle repeatedly cast some sort of flaming tornado and a meteor swarm spell on the other side of the portals. The undead were not expecting an attack on their own base, and they were tightly packed when the counterattack started. By the time that they organized defenses, they had already taken heavy casualties, according to our scouts. Lotus shook her branches in celebration, causing a shower of golden dust to fall from her canopy. Priestess Delilah chuckled and looked past Carl out into the night. If my estimation is right, we don't need to go anywhere. They are about to come to us, under the impression that we are gathering a strike force to go after one of their warehousing locations. Once the reinforcement military units arrive, I give it 2 hours before the next attack. Chapter 907, Burke Regiment. The reinforcements that came for them turned out to be 2 battalions of infantry from the 7th Burke Regiment. Both were made up almost entirely of wrath demons, and they marched with heavy shields in a phalanx formation, ideal for preventing hordes of zombies and other lesser undead from getting into their ranks. They even had specialty shields made, which intrigued Carl. They had a pin and barrel latching system with a pin on the left and a hollow tube on the right, so that when the soldiers were shoulder to shoulder, the large shields could be interlocked to form a defensive wall that the taller demons could attack over. That was an advantage that the wrath demons had on most other species. With the average soldier standing well over 3 meters tall, they dwarfed the undead army, and even the vast majority of the Orcish locals. Avatar of the Red, it is good to see you again. We were told that there is a dragon-favored warrior here, who will draw the undead with their mere presence. The leader of the 1st Battalion to arrive greeted Priestess Delilah. Battalion Commander Daleth, I believe that it might be a whole group. Red Priestess Tessa has much favor of the gods on her, and her mount is certainly destined for greatness, despite his racial limits. But it is the one known as Carl who has far too much destiny swirling around him. The old gods favor him, she replied. The demon gave Carl an appraising look, and Carl shrugged. That's what the clerics keep saying. But mostly, I just have incredible luck. The totem-ranked wrath demon smiled. That's all the favor that you really need. You still look young, though. Perhaps their favor extends to an increase in your growth rate as well. Carl nodded. My class has definite advantages over most when it comes to growth. I grow as my beasts grow, and the separate space skill that I have for them increases their growth rate. What do you have for beasts? So that I can inform my men. There is a blood destruction demonic spider, a winged void badger, a naga shaman queen, a ghostfire thunderbird, and the behemoth that Priestess Tessa is riding is one of my bonded partners as well. Carl offered. The demon frowned. Your luck must be insane to have stumbled across such an interesting variety of beasts. Carl shook his head. It's a side effect of my class. It helps them evolve as they obtain new skills and treasures. Hawk, the blue streak up in the sky, used to be a common rank windspeed hawk. You named your windspeed hawk Hawk? Why not just call him Bird? Remy laughed as the demon clearly judged Carl's lack of naming skills. I am fairly sure that Hawk was the only one of us who was named by Carl without any input into his own name. There is actually one more, a glasswing butterfly, but she's still in her early growth phase and won't interact with the outside world. Remy added. The commander nodded. That should be enough information. I have a general idea what each of those species is capable of, and what a naga shaman can do, so a shaman queen should be the same but on a larger scale. Remy nodded. I have specialized in large area attack spells. It burns a huge amount of stored mana every time, but I can just about clear a battlefield. Having the beast spaces, plus the mana storage staff that Carl made for her, was a blessing. It would be so boring if she could only maintain a full output apocalypse or meteor storm for half a minute or less. The other battalion's leader, a totem-ranked wrath demon named Ligo who could almost have passed as Commander Daleth's brother, came over with news. I have a report from the staging area scouts. The portals are opening now, and we can expect attackers along the border within the next 10 minutes. The sun was just coming up, and they had been fighting most of the night, so the villagers were mostly exhausted and already in bed. They wouldn't be able to stay there long if the invasion came to the city walls again, but the 2 battalions were staged outside, where they could make best use of their trained tactics. We could just not fight them now if we wanted. Kara suggested. It wouldn't take much to just keep closing the portals until the undead got annoyed and went somewhere else. We will let the villagers sleep as long as they can. Did you want to have a quick nap before more fighting? Carl replied. He had been on the wall for most of the night, firing arrows, but he wasn't so tired that he couldn't join the next wave of the battle. Eternal Lightning recovered stamina with ease, especially when you were just waiting around for the next wave of attacks, and the constant healing of Lotus in Tree of Life form negated any chance of a hangover, though most of Carl's team had gotten at least a couple of hours of sleep before the attack started. While they waited for the attack to begin, Hawk returned to his scouting pattern, watching for signs of portals opening in the grasslands around them. If the Red Dragon was right, they should be receiving a rather large force to their location soon, and he had learned to trust the instincts of the clerics. If Tessa got a vision of battle, there would be battle. If Lotus saw snacks or a new friend, there would be snacks or a new friend. Now, at first, that skill had seemed somewhat flaky. But knowing who was a friend and where the food was were both extremely valuable survival skills. Portals are opening. All around the village this time, about a kilometer out. Not large, mostly under 2 meters. But there are at least 20 of them open right now. Hawk reported as the bombgun attack began. 20 portals in a full ring around the village. How do you want to deploy? Carl asked. Commander Ligo gestured out towards the troops. We brought enough soldiers to surround the village. We will let the villagers hold the wall, while we hold outside the moat. Daleth's men will take the north, I will take the south. You can array your team with the villagers for the start of the battle, but kindly hold off on charging out until the initial shield wall is broken. After that, it will be more of a melee, and everyone will recognize your people as allies. Chapter 908. Surrounded. Zombies poured from the portals in an unending wave of rotted flesh, immediately turning the air fetid in an unnatural way. The magic of a black dragon was that of death, but it had a sense of finality to it, almost a lethal cleansing feeling. But the zombies in this group were powerful. Almost all overlords, and they had a half-dozen totem-ranked necromancers with them already. That was not a good sign for a battle that was just starting. There were 3 totems with the group right now, leaving them outnumbered 2-1. However, Carl had a good feeling about this fight. Ray had been learning all sorts of fun new things lately, and there was a good chance that one of the beasts would trigger Skill Master 5 soon and advance a skill by a rank. Even one more totem-ranked attack skill would be a huge boost to their combat abilities. The necromancers had spread themselves evenly around the village, but were hanging back behind the undead horde, guiding its progress while ensuring that there would be no escape from the ambush. Priestess Delilah sent a message as she flapped her wings and took to the sky. Kindly cast that most wonderful defensive spell again. I am going to deal with the necromancers. Carl chuckled as he cast the full suite of buffs over the 3 totems. Impenetrable bulwark, limited invulnerability, brutality, haste, terrorize, and sharpness. Then, just for fun, he cast Behemoth on the ancient red dragon, bringing her overall length close to 90 meters when stacked with brutality. It was impossible to miss the rapidly expanding red dragon as she circled the battlefield, even if she wasn't glowing red with divine favor. And that was precisely what the priestess was after. The looks of absolute terror on the faces of the necromancers when the massive dragon came for them were priceless. Carl could see that they were ready to flee the moment that they saw the dragon double in size, but they managed to hold together long enough to start shouting something through the portals, most likely begging for reinforcements. The first gout of dragon fire turned a human-looking necromancer to ash instantly, and Hawk made a note of the trick for future reference. She is using holy magic on her flames, and the necromancers are coated with unholy power. It's almost like she doused them in acid before setting them on fire. It's beautiful. The 2 necromancers closest to Delilah began to bombard her with spells as the undead horde slammed into the shield wall, sliding the soldiers backward nearly a meter before the second rank hacked down enough of the zombies to stall their momentum. A horn blew, and the demons sent out a wave of attacks that shredded the front ranks of undead, and gave the shield wall time to return to their positions. It was all very methodical and practiced, a direct contrast to Carl's team, who were just happily throwing skills into the horde, or summoning golems into it. Ray was particularly proud of her new Army of the Dead, which had made a dozen overlord-ranked zombie spiders for her, each about the size of a house cat. They were built much like Ray was at that size, and their sharp legs showed no mercy on the undead horde as they pushed forward with the group of golems. They were headed for the spot where Delilah was fighting the necromancers, with the intention of forcing a clearing in the horde so that Ray and Kara could move to engage. They had been instructed to hang back at the start of the fight, and they were enjoying destroying zombies, but they really wanted a totem-ranked kill for the day. It wasn't fair that the dragon got to have all the fun. Delilah wasn't going to be the only one killing fun stuff for long, though. Through the portals, the zombie horde was being replaced by a wave of skeletal knights in piecemeal armor, carrying swords and buckler shields. Then, specters began to arrive, floating above the melee. Carl changed his focus to the spectral undead, as not all combat skills could harm them. Void Blast had no problem damaging spiritual beings, and Hawk's Ghostfire was similarly effective. But the regular flames of the demon army didn't touch them, and that was the primary elemental attack of most of the wrath demons. For the first few seconds, the specters didn't understand the threat posed by the arrows, and simply assumed that they would fly through their bodies. But while the poison arrow base spell wouldn't do anything to them, the Void Blast was truly devastating. Fortunately, there weren't many, and the specters were mostly cleared before the skeleton knights made it to the front lines. The skeletons crashed into the shield wall in a cacophony of steel on steel. Then the rank behind began to climb over to leap into the defenders. Charge! Commander Daleth ordered, and the shield wall abruptly separated as the demons pushed forward, toppling the skeletons. "That's our signal," Carl announced, letting Ray and Remy loose on the battlefield. Ray called her golems back to herself, along with a fresh set of zombie spiders to clear a zone in the battlefield. Remy followed Carl as he vaulted off the wall and into combat. Between them, they had a rather considerable number of guardians, as well as the pair of dire bears that Carl had chosen for golems. Tessa, Ophelia and Dana were working together, with Thor using Bulwark to bulldoze a path for the army to move into the undead horde. The totems weren't trying to close the portals, or at least they weren't trying to yet. They wanted the undead to send as many of their forces to this location as possible so that they could deal a devastating defeat to the Bomgan hordes and not have to face them again tomorrow. The way that Priestess Delilah was going through the necromancers, it didn't seem too far-fetched that they really would crush the Bomgan army here. She had already killed 4 of their totem-ranked leaders and mutilated their bodies beyond resurrection. Only 2 more totem-ranked invaders remained, and the dragon's superficial wounds amounted to no more than small damaged sections on her scales, which were already mending themselves. Chapter 909. Rampage through the skeletons. As Rampage began to get fully stacked, Carl found that the skeletal knights stood no chance before the Blade of Champions. Even when he simply swung it to create an arc of rend to weaken a swathe of undead, most of them would be crippled, or their armor would be severely damaged. Of course, this did not go unnoticed. A pair of overlords and their summoned supporters should not be able to cut through an undead horde that was keeping an entire battalion at bay. It simply didn't make any sense. But like Carl and his team, the skeletal knights also had damage reduction, so the actual damage done to them by the average attack was minimal. It wasn't that they were immensely durable, they simply reduced all damage done by enough that they were hard to kill. But with Rampage in effect, the damage reduction was more than offset, and they were no more than skeletons in crude armor, a mediocre form of undead. The demons of the 7th Burke Regiment pushed out to follow Carl and Remy as he moved toward the portals, intending to let Remy bombard the other side with Apocalypse, once they had a clear view of the situation there. The 2 battalion commanders had reached the remaining necromancers, which had allowed Delilah to join Hawk and Naksha in bombarding the battlefield from above. With Hawk plus 2 dragons, the amount of aerial bombardment was insane, even though Remy didn't use her larger area spells during this battle, just in case they targeted friendlies. Making a spell hit certain targets but not others wasn't always easy. When everyone was in your group, it would happen automatically so that you didn't damage party members, but the system didn't intervene if you should happen to cast a spell that would hit non-combatants, other teams, or hidden allies. Carl noticed that the Lamia bodyguards had fallen back to let a pair of wrath demons take positions at Carl's shoulders. While the Lamia pair did have blades, they were better as a second-line fighter, not the one most likely to be attacked, and the wrath demons were much larger than they were. Carl attempted to include them in Rampage, but found that the spell couldn't be targeted at anyone but his own group. That was unfortunate, but if he explored the system later, there might be a way to include more people in your team of allies. You could include the whole guild and a bunch of strangers to do a dungeon run, so there should be a way to add a military commander and their unit. If there was one thing that the system favored on a reliable basis, it was group activities. Whatever damage increasing skill your class gets is ridiculous. One of the wrath demons joked as he cut down a pair of skeletal knights that Carl had wounded. It's the power of friendship. Remy joked, and the demon spared her a confused glance. The damage buff is based on a percentage of group damage done during the last minute. She clarified. The demon laughed as he cut down one more of the skeletal knights. The power of friendship it is. The skeletal knights began to pack together to stop Carl's group from advancing on the portals, forming a wall of bones that was rapidly being refilled even as Void Blast knocked holes in it. Carl cast Consecrated Ground, Thor's new favorite anti-undead spell, and Remy cast a Hellstorm Vortex in front of them as they paused to let the area damage do its thing. Should we really pause our progress? The demon on Carl's left asked. Give them a moment to swarm into the area effects, and then I will deal with them all at once. Carl replied confidently. The demon didn't look convinced, but Carl could see Priestess Delilah coming their way overhead. With a row of Hellstorm Vortexes pulling the skeletal knights together and away from the soldiers, it was a perfect target for a draconic strafing run. But only because the vortexes multiplied. The skeleton knights seemed particularly inept at destroying them, as it didn't even occur to most of them that the fire was a thing they could attack to dissipate the magic, now that their mental link to the necromancers was gone. The red dragon passed overhead, and a massive gout of flame engulfed the skeleton knights, burning bones to ash and leaving the path clear between Carl and the nearest portal. Everyone, forward. We will push to the portal and separate the undead, he ordered. Technically, he had no authority over the demons, but they didn't hesitate to follow him and his group forward. However, Carl did not find what he was hoping for in the view through the portal. The staging grounds on the other side were dead, barren, and completely empty. Not a single undead was held in reserve at that location, so there probably wouldn't be any more coming. but he could see multiple other portals in the vicinity. Lamia, you're up. Let me know where those other portals go. Carl instructed out loud, for the benefit of the demons. It might be a trap or an illusion. However, if he sent the two bodyguards, they should be able to tell him the truth of the matter. The Lamia duo passed through and entered the Bomgan army staging area, where an immense wave of unholy energy threatened to overcome them. However, with Void Body active on the whole group, thanks to the skills of the Epic Guard, they were regenerating faster than they were being corrupted. The portals all lead here. We can see every angle of the battlefield. Their explanation was both reassuring and disappointing. Remy wouldn't get to bombard an unsuspecting army, but the portals were all accounted for, and there were no more undead in the area. Let your boss know not to send anyone through the portals. There is some sort of necromantic spell there that is trying to corrupt the summoned creatures. If he sends an army unit through, we will be fighting against them in a few minutes. Carl informed the demons beside him. On it. We will make sure that nobody goes through. Can you tell us where the staging area is? One of them replied. Carl shook his head. I can say that it's northwest of here by more than 100 kilometers, and likely less than 200. But I can't say exactly, and there are no real landmarks. It's dead grass and withered trees all the way to the horizon. The demon shrugged. Good enough for me. We have a general description to send to military intelligence, and they can reference the description against what they already know. Might as well bring your creatures back, and we will work on finding a way to close the portals. Chapter 9:10. Excess Energy. Carl gave the demon an amused smile. Oh, I am already on it. They might have created 20 portals, but we have a Kara. Kara looked up from beating a skeleton's face in with its own shield when she sensed her name being mentioned. Is it time to close the portals now? She asked. Yeah, there's nothing there. Not even loot. Those were magic words, and the first 3 portals were closed within a second of each other. That served as a signal to the mages of the 2 units, and they began taking down the rest of the portals while Carl nullified the 2 closest to himself, then resummoned the Lamia pair so they didn't accidentally bring a curse back with them. He might not know what a totem-ranked necromancer was capable of, but a lingering curse didn't seem unrealistic. In fact, he wouldn't be surprised if they spent weeks cleaning the lingering curses and unholy magic from this battlefield. Even with Delilah, Tessa, and Lotus working together. Leave one portal. It is feeding the undead. If we close them all, we leave a reserve of power for the necromancers to draw on. Delilah shouted as Kara was about to close the last of the portals. The Void Badger was starting to like this dragon. She knew what was important. You didn't just defeat the enemy, you had to remember to troll them and extract maximum amusement value before you finished them. Delilah would have been somewhat horrified to know that was how the Badger thought of her. The decision that she made was purely strategic with the larger nationwide war in mind. The psychological effect of having drained their reserve of mana wasn't even a consideration when the act was already a strategic necessity. Now that there was only one portal open, Carl could clearly feel the flow of power from it to the undead army, as well as to the area over the battlefield, where it lingered like a miasma except for 4 distinct areas. Over the village, where Lotus was set up as a healing tree to provide treatment for the injured. Over Thor and Tessa, who were wielding holy magic like a rampaging force of divine justice. Under Priestess Delilah as she passed above the battlefield. And finally, around Carl, who still had consecrated ground active. But the way that their power was building, if they didn't spread this effect, there could be real issues as it began to corrupt the soldiers. There might be something that they could do, Carl thought. Hey Tessa, take Thor and your group to the last portal. Your holy magic auras and spells should help cleanse the miasma that is coming in with the unholy power. Even just keeping consecrated ground cast over the portal area should be fine. Carl messaged the war cleric. They were the closest to the final location, other than Kara, who wasn't capable of casting the spell that they needed this time. Standing on Thor's back, Tessa didn't bother trying to move her group, which currently included both Tessa and Dana. Instead, she began drawing a huge magical circle in the sky of glowing red power. Her new spear was shining golden with holy light, and then Tessa pointed at the portal, and the whole spell moved over to center on the portal. Glowing golden light covered the area, and the flow of unholy power began to mellow as the miasma dissipated. Carl couldn't be sure what sort of purification spell had been cast over the portal, but it clearly hadn't stopped the flow of power. It only removed the curse from it, which was perfect. Not in the minds of most of the soldiers, who had realized that the mana was empowering the skeleton knights to keep them at overlord rank. But in the larger strategic sense, it was a victory. Carl used Gravity Slam to knock down a section of the skeletal knights, then bulldoze them with Bulwark, copying Thor's tactics to push them into a tighter formation, where more would be hit with every spell, and fewer soldiers would be needed to contain the now separated section of the undead horde. The wall only lasted a few seconds before the undead hacked it apart, but that was long enough to rearrange them for the soldiers. Overhead, Hawk was glowing with an immense amount of ghostly green flame, a second sun in the sky, too bright to look at as he prepared for something. "What are you planning, buddy?" Carl asked, as Hawk's thoughts were silent in his mind. If they had to wrestle an undead Thunderbird to the ground and cleanse, then resurrect him, Carl would not be happy. But Hawk's link to Carl was perfectly intact, whatever he was doing. A massive fireball launched from the sky, causing the demons to cuss and run from the target zone, while the undead froze in place, staring up at their impending doom. Skill Master 5 activation. Fireball has evolved to the epic grade skill Purgatory Flames. Purgatory Flames launches a maximum 20 user rank fireball at the target. Damage is dependent upon the user's current mana pool. Depletes all remaining mana on use. Deals double damage to spiritual beings, undead and water element beings. All the bonded partners saw the message, and Remy had some serious questions. How exactly does Purgatory Flame relate to extra damage against water element? It's a soul-based attack that purges undead, she asked, while Hawk preened in pride. That's why it's epic. He insisted. That's not how logic works. Carl, Hawk is picking on me again. Remy pouted. Carl laughed to himself at their bickering. Did you not just learn a skill that creates a raging river anywhere you happen to be standing? I think a Ghostfire fireball that targets water is only fair. Purely out of spite, Remy created a Naga swamp under the nearest group of skeletons, who promptly sank in the mud, except for the first rank, which was fighting the demons. Chapter 9:11. Somebody call 911. Even though Remy had created the swamp to spite Hawk and his giant anti-water user fireball, the demons were not the least bit upset about the battlefield conditions. It confused the skeletons, slowed their reinforcements, and if you knocked one backward into it, the creature took longer than usual to get back up, giving the warrior time to catch his or her breath. That spell takes too long. I want to do it again now. Carl, I need a thing like Remy has for more mana. Hawk complained. A piece of jewelry with enough mana storage to let him double cast that spell was an absurd request. Even 3 items wouldn't be enough to fully replace his mana. But he could get back enough to not slow down his other attacks while he regenerated for a while. I will work on something for you once we're done with the undead. You might have more ideas with some practice. Carl agreed. He had a point, Hawk thought. The new fireball had just been invented, there might be room to improve it. Remy broke his concentration with a new idea. If I aimed Thousand-Year Flood straight down and then flew around the battlefield to clean up, that should make it rain about 3 centimeters a second for 100 meters around me. I could be a rain goddess for the withered crops. Hawk snorted. For one, you can't fly very fast, you'd flood everything. But more importantly, this is clearly just bullying. Carl chuckled. You two cut it out. No fire versus water arguments in battle. Besides, you're both still losing to Ray in kills. Hawk paused. That couldn't be right, could it? No. She really was beating him even after his huge fireball. It definitely took too long to recover from. The reminder got both of them back to work, creating hellstorm vortexes to pull the undead together for faster clearance rates, while the rest of the group tried not to laugh at their renewed motivation and rivalry after Hawk's new spell. They would ask about it later, but watching the bestial siblings clearly trying to one-up each other was highly entertaining for those who could see it from their position. Carl found himself too far from the battle again and switched to his bow, which caught the attention of the demons. Now that is shiny. Where did you get that? The one on Carl's right asked as he hurled a fire bolt over the front rank of defenders and into the swamped skeletons. My guild made it. It's a custom piece, obviously. But we have overlords for smithy, alchemy, and runecrafting. Carl explained as he fired volleys of void blast arrows into the swamp. How are you not out of mana? The same demon asked. Carl smiled and shook the bow. It's got a reduced mana cost for the arrows. They're actually quite efficient to cast, and I made accessories for mana regeneration. The demon fired a few more shots as he considered the description. I will have to talk to the commander. I bet that he could get approval to buy a few like it for the squad leaders. Now, the rest of us might not make enough in a year to even consider buying that, but the army is a bit more generous with those in leadership. That was certainly going to be true if they were willing to purchase epic-grade overlord-ranked weapons. That was a very generous benefit by any army standards, even if they were well worth the cost. Those arrows are particularly effective. Is there more than just the void spell on that arrow? The other demon asked. The void blast is layered on top of a poison arrow made solid with blessed item. As it was made specifically for me, I went a bit overboard. But the arrows get a bonus against anything sensitive to holy damage. With me adjusting the void blast to larger radius with lower initial output, the blast causes holy damage to multiple undead at a time. I'm quite proud of this one, even if I didn't make the base bow that the runes were added to. That was done by our guild's Grandmaster Smith. The demons near Carl all chuckled. Now you're making us all jealous. But against the undead, A holy explosion is just ridiculously good. Even a little bit of holy damage would be a huge damage increase. Plus, their damage ignore doesn't work on holy damage. Carl nodded in understanding. I will talk to the two commanders after the battle, and see if they can get approval for a number of items that will add holy damage to attacks. Wait, I have a temporary solution. Carl focused for a second to cast Talisman with runes for bonus holy damage on it. Then he folded it in half and stuck it in the armor of the demon on his right. Try that, he instructed. The next fire bolt exploded with a flash of golden light on impact, and the nearby skeletons were more charred than usual. So, Carl made a half-dozen more and gave them to everyone standing nearby, including Remy. There was no need to give them to the golems and bodyguards, they already got enough bonuses. Shining golden blades made short work of the undead, even if the overall effect was a bit like an outdoor concert in the middle of the day, with all the flashing lights. Carl made a mental note that the holy damage runes were not stealth-friendly. The swamp was rapidly being cleared with even a half-dozen holy damage talismans, and Carl realized just how much difference being properly equipped to fight the undead made. The demons had absolutely zero affinity with holy magic. The only chance they had at it was becoming a cleric to another species god. And even that was somewhat sketchy. So, what had been a stalemate between unholy magic element users was completely overturned with just a few added holy magic spells. And that gave Carl a great idea. It wouldn't take much to make a cloak pin or brooch that gave them some holy damage, or converted a portion of their damage to the holy element. That would absolutely annihilate the undead hordes. It was simply not something that had been available to them, not a new idea. Making items with holy damage that were compatible with demonic users wasn't something that most clerics could or would do. It would normally reject them. But Carl's talismans had been fine, so he hadn't realized there might be a conflict yet. Chapter 9:12, Pulled the Boss. Dana looked over at the spectacle in Carl's section of the battlefield with concern. There was a lot of flashing golden light over there, and they were beginning to pull undead from other regions toward themselves. What is he doing over there? Tessa shouted so the flying mage could hear her. I have no clue. If I had to hazard a guess, I would say he invented holy hand grenades. It's just explosions of holy light constantly. Dana called back. Thor laughed at the thought. Holy hand grenades sounded like a lot of fun. Tessa shook her head in dismay. Well, if that's an item and not a skill, I will insist that he shares it. But we're almost done with the undead in our zone, and the unholy magic from the portal is beginning to wane. As soon as the words were out of her mouth, Tessa had a premonition. The magic wasn't just to keep the army powered, it was a built-in failsafe. Everyone, we have a mission timer on this battle. We need every undead eliminated before that mana from the portal runs out. It's a trap, she informed the group. If she were wrong, then she would apologize for alarming them. Well, if anyone asked her to. Remy and Ray were currently making bets on who could kill a massive number of undead the fastest. Giving them a timer was just a motivation to compete with each other. Even Thor joined the fun. Carl, bring up a bulwark. I'm sweeping your direction. Carl saw what Thor was thinking as the behemoth charged through the undead with a wide wall of magical ice in front of him. Carl created his own wall of ice, then charged toward the massive beast and his red-robed rider. Tessa was standing on Thor's back, brunette hair flying in the wind, having escaped her usual braid, and marshalling the demonic armies to follow behind them. The barrier would fail on impact, and some of the undead were likely to be alive after. Carl coated the entire wall in front of him with void blast set to detonate on impact. The idea was simple, the undead would be crushed between the two walls, and the spell would detonate like a bullet down a barrel. It wouldn't harm the barriers, but it wouldn't bypass them either, creating a magical pressure cooker for the skeleton knights. The explosion rang through the grasslands as if a massive cannon had been fired, and skeletal remains were thrown hundreds of meters in the air in the narrow space between the two walls as Carl and Thor collided. Then both barriers collapsed from the secondary damage of the flying weapons and the skills of the skeleton knights, who had the cognitive ability to realize what was happening to them. Carl laughed as he hacked his way through the undead survivors, while holy spears rained down around him. Glowing with red holy energy and standing on the back of a rampaging behemoth, Tessa really did look like a war goddess unleashed. It wasn't hard to see why the myriad armies of the world were inspired to follow the Red Dragon clerics into battle. Carl used Gravity Slam, aimed straight ahead to hurl a wave of skeleton knights away for an unengaged unit to deal with, and Thor realized that he had missed a grand opportunity to delegate responsibilities. Ophelia rumbled in amusement, then set her head on top of Carl's for a moment as she passed by. Dana descended to talk to him as they finished the last of the nearby enemies. What did you do over in the swamp spell? It looked like holy magic grenades, she asked. I actually used Talisman to put holy damage on the demons. It created a flash of light on every strike. Dana nodded, losing interest if it was just some extra damage. But Tessa was intrigued. Holy magic buffs worked on the demons, and they exploded with light on contact. That sounded like the spells were actually creating mutual rejection with the demons' attacks, but not enough that the talisman failed. Carl saluted the ladies with his blade, then crouched and leapt into the air, using swim through air to keep him aloft while he surveyed the battlefield. The undead were almost defeated, with only a few more pockets left. Hey, tell the others to stay away from the bodies if they're not in battle. We suspect that the mana flow has a trap embedded when it ends, and the army might explode or something. Carl shouted down at the demon commanders. They all passed along the warning, and Remy quickly led the golems and other summons to a clear space where they could attack from a distance. The power from the attack's origin was waning fast, and while they might be able to clear out the last of the skeleton knights in time, it would be a very close call. Then the power through the portal suddenly surged, and another portal opened over the battlefield, almost directly in front of Carl. He moved out of the way, but the portal followed him, as well as the 3 totems that they had on the battlefield. Delilah shouted at the rest. They've targeted us. Expect 4 powerful undead to come through. Carl, just hold on, and we will come rescue you when we're done. Carl gave her a salute, but returned to the ground where the beasts could join the fight. Don't worry, priestess. I can hold my own. The dragon was skeptical of his answer, but there wasn't much that she could do to change the situation. As her own opponent, a massive bone dragon, similar to the one she had killed the day before, flew through the portal. Fortunately, Carl had thought far enough ahead to give them his limited invulnerability buff before the battle began, and it hadn't expired yet. With that on their side, they should have the edge on the totem-ranked undead that were sent to attack them now that they were wearied by the battle. Chapter 9:13. Carl versus Vampire. Carl stared at the undead that had come to face him. The vampiress was tall and statuesque, bone-white with long raven hair and not a stitch of clothing on. They have found your kryptonite and just directly sent you a naked woman. Ray laughed hysterically as she moved into position. Laugh all you want. Just make sure that you're ready to move when the time comes. The vampire circled Carl, looking increasingly perplexed as whatever mental skill she was trying to use had no effect on him. Then she seemed to vanish, moving so fast that only instinct put Carl's blade in place to parry the first attack. But not the second, third, or fourth. The vampire's claws smoked from contact with the holy energy of eternal lightning, but Carl's barrier was nearly gone, and he hadn't even landed a strike. The undead smirked, and Carl winked at her, confusing the totem-ranked undead even more. Then he centered Void Blast on himself. The explosion of black energy sent her flying backward into Ray's zombie spiders, which were rapidly torn apart by the enraged undead. Even Ray wasn't safe from the fallout, and suffered a shattered forelimb for a few seconds before it mended itself. That thing is too fast. Even I can't attack fast enough to get a clean strike, Ray complained. She was also incorporeal and invisible, so if she couldn't land a strike, not many others would be able to. Fortunately, they didn't actually need to hit the vampire. Kara retreated to her space where she could get a full overview of the battlefield and prepared for her counterattack. Setting off Void Blast, in a shotgun pattern, should be able to hit no matter how fast the target was. Ray had the same idea, and sprayed out a net of sticky silk to slow down and locate the target. Vampire claws flashed with some sort of attack skill that created a minefield of rend attacks around her. Not moving, they just rotated into existence like claw strikes, then vanished. Carl had never thought of using rend that way. He sent it out in a wave, but he could likely create hundreds of attacks in a split second. The damage would be low, but a hit would be nearly guaranteed. The undead totem looked at Ray, obviously able to see her, even in Night Haunter incorporeal form, then returned her attention to Carl. You are a tricky little blood bag, she hissed. And you got a bit too excited about sucking me, showing up without clothes and all. The vampire vanished and Carl felt her power approaching, so he detonated Void Blast around himself again. A split second before claws tore through his forearm. He was slammed to the ground on his back, and the claws moved to both sides of his chest. Carl grabbed her wrists, trapping her hands as the vampire's claws ripped into his chest and Void Blast flayed her skin. In the battle of strength, they were closely matched. Carl couldn't throw her off without leverage, and she was unable to push her claws into any vital organs, so their battle was one of regeneration. Even with attacks raining down on her, and Ray repeatedly stabbing her in the back with poisoned daggers, the vampire's wounds closed in a split second, while Carl's chest was covered in black mist as Void Body regenerated him. Why don't you die? The vampire demanded. That's my line. You showed up for naked wrestling in a consecrated ground zone. Just turn to ash already. Carl replied. Pain racked his body as the vampire blasted him with repeated attacks, shattering the remains of his armor. Most of his body had lingering black mist over it now as Void Body regenerated him, and Carl spat blood as the vampire smiled. Good try. But that's not going to be enough for you to win. Carl added Ghostfire Body to the next Void Blast, and the vampire briefly lit with ethereal fire before it was snuffed out. But Carl could feel the Haint Claw draw a bit of vitality before that happened. That seemed to be the answer. Just a little more stolen at a time. Carl equipped the Haint Claw to his hands and lit them with Ghostfire as he continually channeled Void Blast, which was the only skill he had that bypassed the totem rank damage reduction ability. From 50 meters away, Ray stared at their battle in annoyance. The unstable energy of their battle now made it unsafe for her to approach and attack. The last time she did, she got 2 of her legs vaporized before she even made it to them. She wasn't even attacking with ranged skills anymore, as whatever the vampire was doing destabilized all attacks that came near them. So her attacks joined the general miasma of power, and they were damaging Carl as well. But with Void Body, Consecrated Ground, Behemoth's Vitality, and Impenetrable Bulwark active, Carl had an absolutely ridiculous amount of damage reduction and regeneration. Quick math said 50%, plus numbers damage reduction. With 3 times Void Body's usual regeneration. Ray leaned over to whisper to Dana, who had already realized none of their attacks were reaching the stationary battle of wills. Do you think we're flirting wrong? Is that why we don't have mates? Do you think that showing up naked and pinning them to the ground while you try to kill them is a seduction technique? Dana countered. Ray shrugged. I can't rule it out. Flames were slowly climbing up the vampire's arms as the Haint Claw stole more power and its regeneration rate slowed. But the chaotic energy whipping around the area was getting worse as well, and nothing else dared to come near them. All of the surrounding plant life was destroyed, and Ray wasn't sure if the combatants even realized that they were floating in place, as the ground had been obliterated beneath them while the energy flows were too thick to let them fall. The real question was who was losing faster, the vampire against the fire, or Carl, whose body was slowly becoming more energy than flesh. Chapter 9:14. Chaotic Fluctuations. One after another, the totems finished their fights and came over, starting with Priestess Delilah, who transformed into a dark-haired human woman in the same red High Priestess robes that Tessa wore. Dana frowned at her, while Tessa nodded politely. But the dragon didn't move forward, just waited and watched. Then the 2 demons came to stand with her, and Dana needed answers. Is nobody going to help him? Surely one of you can get close, you're all totems. She demanded. We would if we could. You can try it yourself, we can't get within 5 paces of them. There is an invisible divine barrier there. The gods are letting them battle it out on their own terms. The conjured creatures and constructs from his bonded beasts appear to have no issue, but I had to increase my altitude when I came over here, to avoid running into the barrier. Any spell we cast, like yours, will just get added to the mess. The priestess explained. Dana glared at the suspended battle of wills, and Tessa sighed. If this had happened just a bit earlier, when there was still a battle going on around us, it might have been different. He gets a stacking bonus to damage from the whole group. But right now, there is only one target and the number of attacks that they can use against it is limited. Probably only Carl and Kara, wherever she went, could even stand a chance of doing real damage to that vampire. But what sort of vampire is that? 10 minutes in Consecrated Ground should have killed almost any undead, and she's taking the full force of a totem-ranked Void Blast continually, plus the flames. Tessa pondered. Priestess Delilah shook her head, not knowing the answer. But Commander Daleth had an idea. But what sort of vampire is that? 10 minutes in Consecrated Ground should have killed almost any undead, and she's taking the full force of a totem-ranked Void Blast continually, plus the flames. Tessa pondered. Priestess Delilah shook her head, not knowing the answer. But Commander Daleth had an idea. I think that she might be one of the Council of Ancients. There aren't many totem-ranked vampires. Those species with totem-ranked bloodline potential can usually heal from the virus, so they just remain dead instead of turning. That suggests that she might have reached totem rank during the last system resurgence 10,000 years ago. At that age and totem ranked, she could be considered virtually immortal. The sun doesn't appear to be harming her at all, though not much light is passing through to them now. Plus, that level of regeneration. Vampires get stronger with age, just like our friend Thor here. Only, where he takes less damage for every day, they regenerate a bit faster every day. The fact that she is showing damage long enough for us to see it is testament to how much damage is being done. But neither of them should be able to keep this up forever. The rate they're expending energy has to be faster than their regeneration. He explained. 701. Remy nodded in agreement. The Carl is drawing from our spaces as he fights. Sister Butterfly has insane mana regeneration, and the rest of us are putting at least a little in for him to use, but he's still drawing more than we're putting in. But he's going to run out of body before he runs out of mana. Remy wasn't actually concerned that Carl would die. Void Body turned you into black mist when damaged, and she hadn't seen a limit to it yet. So, it was possible it could turn a whole Carl into mist and then let him reform. Besides, even if that thing did kill him, she still had a whole ball of his shed fur in her pouch for Lotus to resurrect him from. That had to count as a body part. So, as the two oblivious combatants fought for dominance, the rest of the army was left watching in horror as the entangled energies became even more wildly imbalanced. Then, it began to rain black droplets of power from the miasma onto the two, as if they were the center of gravity. Carl thought his vision was fading at first, until Kara informed him that it was just black energy condensing on them. Then suddenly everything seemed to vanish, and he found himself in the void. Well, I don't feel dead, Carl muttered to himself. Indeed, you don't look dead either, a musical voice agreed, and Carl turned to face the vampiress, only to find that he couldn't use skills at all, or even do more than rotate on the spot. She swatted ineffectually at him, just a little too far apart for their fingertips to touch if Carl reached out in her direction. Do you think we broke something? Carl wondered. I think that we intrigued something. Something terrible. They stared silently at each other for a moment before a third presence joined them. An impossibly large black dragon, easily 200 meters long without counting its tail, with a wingspan twice that distance. The dragon stared at them from a distance, then transformed into a black-robed human and walked across the void to inspect them more closely. Matilda, Supreme Lady of the Dark Light Host, Sihosesa branch location. Crap, not a black dragon. A supreme rank chaos dragon. It took the vampire a little longer to figure out who it was, but when she did, she went from unnaturally white to roughly the color of fine porcelain. A new branch of the Darklight Host has opened. Has it? And they are willing to go to war for the guild? Interesting. Very interesting. And you brought me such an adorable new pet. I think I will keep her this time. The vampire's nameplate still wasn't visible, but that didn't seem to bother the dragon. Supreme Lady Matilda, my apologies if our battle disturbed your afternoon. It wasn't our intention. The vampire began. Now, Tiffany, is there any need for such formalities? The dragon replied with a smile. Yes, Supreme Lady. I believe that you might have misinterpreted the situation. I did not enter your territory, and we had an agreement that you would not come for me if I stayed away. Tiffany, the totem-ranked vampire, replied. But you did, didn't you? I sensed the instant that you entered the Chaos Plane. This is my territory as much as Sihosesa is. Chapter 9:15. Supreme Lady Matilda. Carl cleared his throat. Sorry to interrupt, but how did we get here? I don't recall having an ability to enter the Chaos Plane, or any other plane for that matter. The dragon seemed amused at the question. You don't. Your little spat with the lovely Tiffany created a Chaos Plane anomaly. Void magic and death magic, condensed until they liquefied. What else did you expect? Not this. Carl replied with a shrug. The vampire nodded. If anything, she would have expected the underworld or perhaps the netherworld or one of the other lower planes. But opening a planar anomaly was not anywhere on the list of expected outcomes of their contest to begin with. However, she didn't have any intentions of going home with that insane dragon. The Supreme Lady could keep that cockroach of an immortal annoyance instead. If you show me something interesting, perhaps I could show you how to go home, Matilda suggested. Carl smirked and removed Kara from her space to hold her out toward the dragon. The Supreme Lady looked confused as she approached and stared at Kara, who booped her with her nose, then licked her cheek. The dragon froze in place as both Carl and Kara burst into laughter. Tiffany gasped in horror and turned to stare at him. You are literally insane. Did I disintegrate something important in your brain? I might be facing a horrible future, but you are so fucked. Satisfying. Spicy. A bit sweet. Kara agreed. Matilda was still staring at Carl and Kara, who was now flying around the Chaos Plane on her own, while Carl was completely unable to move. Oh, I see now. You are right, that is interesting. You found a way to have a winged void badger blessed by the laughing god. Matilda muttered, then cast a spell that created a small mirror in the air on her right. The scene in the mirror changed rapidly, then came into focus, looking at a small burrow full of baby void badgers. An incorporeal black mist surged with power, and the area was obliterated, except for a black ball where the mother badger protected her young. Then the scene cut and Kara was standing on Carl's shoulder as he swatted away the attack of the four-armed titan at the Golden Dragon capital. Then it showed her being attacked by orcs and meeting Carl, who lured her in with food. Finally, it showed a flash of her looting an unknown species of insectoid warrior in a dungeon, followed by the moment that she licked the bone dragon. So, that's how it is. It's my history. In no particular order. But some of those things haven't happened yet. Kara cheered as she flew over to land on the dragon. The scenes kept playing, but Matilda turned the mirror so only the two of them could see it. A few minutes later, the mirror vanished, and Supreme Lady Matilda sighed. It's a shame I had to miss so many of the good parts in person. Well, time to go. Then she simply vanished, along with Tiffany. Kara flew around for a moment, enjoying her time in the chaos plane. This was a good place, and she could really feel the wind in her fur. It was like a refreshing blow-dryer after a bubble bath. Even if Carl didn't feel any wind in the realm at all, it was like it didn't touch him. Or maybe it just hadn't started yet for him. It was better not to think too deeply about such things. Then the void around Carl seemed to twist, and he was ejected back out, only to find himself locked back in battle with Tiffany. Their eyes met in shock, and the vampire turned to mist, fleeing their engagement. The world twisted, and a flash of the memory of the events in the void returned to Carl's mind. Again, Carl found himself back in battle with Tiffany, who looked even more panicked this time. Everything is chaotic, Kara explained in a sage voice from inside her space. The loop repeated for a third time, and Tiffany looked resigned as time restarted. Then she again turned into mist and tried to run. But this time the black layer was a bit thinner, and when she pulled away from Carl, she simply vanished, leaving behind nothing but the scent of Chaos Dragon and her own fear. Memories slammed into Carl's mind, and he realized that Ray and the others hadn't experienced any of that. For them, nothing had happened but the deadlock, then the vampire being extracted by the Chaos Dragon. Whether they had been able to sense the presence of the supreme rank dragon at all was questionable, but Carl and Kara could still smell her presence, like a waft of perfume after she had left the room. Carl caught his breath as his body finished healing, and then realized he was both naked and human again. A quick transformation and a fresh set of armor had him ready to go. But Priestess Delilah had some questions. What exactly was that? I thought I felt a chaos dragon take the vampire away. And why did you turn human when your armor broke? She demanded. I didn't turn human when my armor broke. Somewhere at the end, my transformation spell must have been dispelled. My natural state is much less furry. A chaos dragon did intervene. Apparently, something that we did alerted Supreme Lady Matilda, and she claimed the vampire as her own. Carl explained. Sihosesa is involved with Bomgan? Commander Ligo asked, horrified. Carl shook his head. No, the vampire was definitely from Bomgan, but she had some sort of deal where she agreed that the Supreme Lady would never see her again, and once she did, the Chaos Dragon simply took her. There was some overlap of time there. I don't know what sort of skill that was. Priestess Delilah nodded. That's understandable. Everything becomes chaotic around her. Time flow, mana levels, everything. New cities and dungeons have been known to appear out of nowhere when she is mad at someone. Chaos indeed. Carl checked his mind and found that Kara was safely in her space, reclined on her pile of treasure, reminiscing about whatever she had seen in that mirror. Her thoughts were oddly close to Carl, but whatever she saw had pleased the badger. Chapter 9:16, But did you die? Commander Ligo joined the conversation. So, just to be certain, there is no chance that Sihosesa is working with Bomgan, correct? Carl nodded. That is correct. It was personal between the dragon and the vampire. There was no indication of alliance, military or otherwise, between the two nations. But how did the other fights go? The demon shrugged. The extra damage reduction your team granted us made all the difference. My apologies for not coming to your aid, but void and death together create chaos, and the energy around your fight made it unsafe for anyone else to attempt to use skills or approach the area. But more importantly, in all that mess, were you bitten? Vampire toxin isn't always recognized as a negative state by healing spells and regeneration. Carl thought back through the battle. No, I don't believe that I was bitten. Clawed quite a bit, hit with every offensive skill that she could think of. But not bitten. That is excellent news. It saves us an extra step in the post-fight quarantine and monitoring stage. If there was any risk of high-ranking vampire bites, someone would have to monitor you all night in case you died and returned as an overlord-ranked vampire. That would be bad. Commander Ligo explained. Oh. Dana asked. Imagine him with all his skills. A faster and driven mad by bloodlust. It takes newly turned vampires months or even years before most of them are sane enough that they can be released from captivity for more than suicide missions. Even the Bomgan armies only use new vampires as shock troops, and that's a massive waste, as they're so powerful once they sober up from the bloodlust. The demon explained. Dana chuckled. I can't imagine Mick, our vampiric shop clerk, as a bloodthirsty monster. That made the big demon chuckle. It only happens to turned vampires, not true-born living vampires, children born with the virus from infected parents. Is she still alive, or is she once dead already? Still alive. Kind of? Vampires are a bit odd. Dana hesitantly answered. If there is doubt, she's alive. But their hearts beat very slowly and they're primarily sustained by blood and magic. They get extra creepy when they're dead. More powerful, but definitely creepier. Carl chuckled at the thought of Mick being called creepy. Maybe there was someone who saw her that way, but he just couldn't. Not when Ray had her dressed in a frilly ruffled Lolita dress and carrying a parasol at work. Thor agreed with Commander Ligo. That crazy naked woman was way creepier than any other vampire he had seen. But now that the battle was over, the hard part could begin. There was a load of cleanup to be done, and the majority of the farmland around the village was completely obliterated. Even with all the powerful creatures they had here, there would be no salvaging most of the crops. I will join the Thunderbird and we will scorch this region clear of all signs of the undead. Then, if the dancing tree likes to fly, I will take her up to restore the soil while Priestess Tessa makes potatoes for them to plant. They will grow well enough in the soil and they can grow year-round here so the farmers don't starve. Priestess Delilah insisted. Oh, she loves to fly. I'm sure that she will be overjoyed to help you. Tessa agreed. The red dragon smiled gently. It was a given that the green dragon priestess would be on board with a flight on the back of a totem-ranked red dragon. Fortunately, most of the battle had been skeletons, so there wasn't much toxic blood to deal with, and only the portions where the zombies had been engaged needed to be intensively purged, while Thor and Carl were tasked with using bulwark to make piles out of the skeleton bones. Those would be burned to ash to reduce the amount of undead corruption that could be spread by their presence. Ray and Remy had already stolen a lot of the hand bones for making arts and crafts, as well as some rare potions, but the rest could be burned. Nobody needed huge undead leg bones anyhow. Within an hour, the battlefield was cleaned and Lotus was ready for her flight. Delilah came prepared and she even had a custom saddle made with an adjustable belt to hold the rider on during hard maneuvering. It might have been even more fancy than the ones that Ray made. They made slow and lazy circles in the sky as Lotus rained nature magic down on the region, bringing life back to the scorched and barren ground. But Lotus was better at nature magic than the red dragon had been expecting, and she caused the potato plants to appear and sprout all through the fields before she was finished. As an added benefit, that also took Lotus much longer than just seeding the fields. A whole extra hour in the sky riding on a dragon. Entire fields would be ready to start harvesting in a few months, about the time that the villagers would be running out of the supplies that Tessa had left for them today. It would change the stews for a while, but at least they would still have plenty to eat. Tessa spent most of that time working with Thor on rebuilding the damaged road sections, as bulwark had proven to be such an effective earth-moving tool when attached to a behemoth. Thor could push massive piles of dirt and gravel with ease, and a little work to build up the road above the level of the fields would make it much less muddy than before. Everything drained to the dry moat around the village anyhow. Chief Snakebite came out to greet Carl when he approached the village after finishing the cleanup. Excellent work, Overlord. We have a long house for your people, so you can sleep. I remember that you've been up since yesterday already. Carl patted him on the shoulder. Thank you. I'm sure everyone will be grateful for the rest. If you talk to one of the battalion leaders, they'll let you know what their night watch practice is. But first, I think we should probably cat. If I tell the ladies to go to bed hungry, I will be sleeping in a pig barn. Chapter 9:17, Battle Report. The longhouse was like a military barracks, set up for 100 people to sleep in, with a large open space in the center, set up for a cooking fire. Carl woke up the next morning to the usual sounds of his group in camp. Dana mumbling to herself as she shifted in his arms. Thor and Tessa preparing breakfast, Lotus trying to escape from Ophelia, and now Naksha laughing at the little priestess dilemma. The black dragon waved at Carl as he sat up in bed. Oh, really isn't a morning person, is she? Everyone awake shook their heads in solidarity. If she didn't have Lotus with her, she would sleep at least 3 more hours a day. But they're basically a bonded pair at this point, so she puts up with the early morning wake-up calls. Carl explained quietly. Ophelia opened one eye then ruffled Lotus' hair before tucking the little cleric back underneath her. You're all too loud. We were up for 2 days and a night. Let me sleep. Tessa chuckled. Well, it's almost noon. If we don't have breakfast now, it'll be lunch. They had slept from late afternoon until nearly noon the next day, and she was hungry. The orcs had brought them supplies at some point, as there was a basket of eggs by the door. But Thor had given her a large whale steak to fry, and there was a massive skillet full of what smelled like bacon grease, garlic, and chopped potatoes. Once that was frying, the smell was enough to rouse Ophelia from her slumber, and everyone got prepared for their day's activities. Priestess Delilah came inside, transformed into a middle-aged woman with hair as bright red as her robes and a stern face that spoke of countless years dealing with children. Do you mind if I join you? There are some things to discuss this morning while the army is preoccupied. The red dragon asked. There's always enough for more visitors. Sit where you like. Tessa agreed. Delilah picked a spot beside Naksha as she was alone on a bed and got right to business. It seems that your premonition was right. The energy flows were a trap, and the arrival of the last wave of totems was not a coincidence. We have reports of 12 other attacks, all much smaller than the one that we endured, but all of them ended with either an undead plague curse or a group of totems arriving on the scene the moment that the energy flow from the battlefields ended. Unlike the others, it appears that we managed to attract an entire staging area to one spot. That might not sound like a good thing, but I would contend that it was. We had 3 totems here, plus a strong support overlord to help deal with 6 necromancer lords. The Bomgan nation took a heavy blow last night, with the loss of an entire totem-ranked necromantic coven and 2 ancients. Well, 3 if we consider the vampire to be lost to them, though she is confirmed to be alive. Carl gave her a curious look. She has been confirmed alive already? Delilah nodded. Supreme Lady Matilda took her shopping in the late hours of last night. The vampire has been imprisoned with magical cuffs that suppress her ability to transform as well as some of her abilities. So she is no longer considered to be a threat. But more than that, the number of totems that will support the Lord of the Undead is limited. There might be hundreds of them spread through the Undead nation, but most have their own goals and their own territories. Getting them to move everything to the border for a foreign invasion under someone else's control takes more than a simple command. Especially now that they have taken a large number of losses. Of course, it's the same for the demons, is it not? There is a totem-ranked chief in town, but they wouldn't and couldn't send the chiefs of every single village to the border no matter how bad the attacks got. That made perfect sense. Even if they were creating an undead army, you couldn't take the leaders from every village in the entire nation into the army. Even conscription usually only took a portion of the nobles, then conscripted kids from the families to fill the ranks of officers. Tessa started to dish out breakfast as it was ready. So, are we expecting more attacks today? How did the other battles go? Delilah sighed. Well enough. The Bomgan army inflicted 3 totem-ranked losses upon the Bomgan army for every totem they lost, not counting our group. But some villages suffered extensive damage before the attackers were repelled. At the moment, the Lord is more concerned about what caused this recent bit of aggression. There are some obvious clues, but Lord Bomgan hasn't officially said anything or made any demands. That did sound strange. You didn't usually start a large-scale invasion without some sort of motivation or demands. Unless they were getting overpopulated and needed more space, in which case the answer was that they were just planning to fight until they either gained enough land or lost enough troops. Well, if there is no clear reason or target, all we can really do is wait for them to attack again. That's nearly the worst situation for the border villages, just waiting to see if they'll be wiped out one day. But I suppose it's worse for the army. Carl replied. Delilah nodded. Exactly. They're spreading out again so that they don't leave too large of a region exposed to attack, but it's just a guessing game where the attacks will land unless we get some sort of divine inspiration. Beside her, Naksha chuckled. I suspect that we won't need much divine inspiration to guess that they will attack us again. After yesterday's battle, both the red and black dragons were pleased with our performance. The undead army won't stand for that. So I suspect that wherever we go, we will be attacked again soon. The only thing that would stop it would be to go to a city too large and heavily defended for them to launch another full-scale attack on us. Chapter 9:18, The Nature of the Dragon Isles. That was the same thing that was on everyone's mind. They were going to be targeted again after eliminating 9 totem-ranked undead and necromancers in the course of a single battle. The loss of an army was a significant blow, but the loss of its assigned leaders was worse. Under normal circumstances, they should be able to escape, and the leaders of an army rarely fought to the death unless they had a sure way to resurrect, like the ones who fought at the battle in Drod City. However, things were still calm after the finished breakfast, and the village was beginning to get back to their routine, with the orcs going out to check on the newly revamped fields to see what they had coming for crops and what it needed. Most of the outlying fields were fine as they were past the battlefield, but those who worked the inner fields had countless notes to take about the current state of the land. Especially as all the field boundaries had changed with Thor and Carl bulldozing up the undead bodies. Chief Snakebite motioned for them to join him on the porch of his house, where he had a large book set out. Thank you all for the help. If you would like to continue your battles against the undead, I got a notice this morning that the city of Bach has been recruiting adventurers into a force to clear the border region around Ekbor in preparation for a retaliatory invasion. The giant orc suggested. Carl looked to the others for a decision. The point of the trip was to build experience, which should help their growth and please the gods. Both of those things would be likely to happen if they joined this expedition. But there was always a chance when you joined a larger ongoing plan that someone would try to use you as cannon fodder. For that reason alone, showing up at random places to join border defense forces was a superior method of support. Delilah shrugged. If you can all advance one more time, you could probably come out of the dead zone and visit the rest of the Dragon Isles. Carl would most likely be alright traveling alone as an overlord, but he's as much a beast as the ones bonded to him. Dana gave her a confused look. What do you mean the dead zone? Delilah laughed softly as she realized that they didn't know the nickname. The region around the undead horde and the whole southeastern isle in general is known as the dead zone on the other islands. It's where those without potential go to die, never able to reach immortality. For example, I'm from northern Kapi near the Sihosesa Straits. There are no lesser demon species there. No orcs, no lesser trolls, and the only thing elevating most of the Dragonkin above slavery is the law prohibiting the practice. If you can't make overlord rank by adulthood, your life is somewhere between forfeit and worthless. I was the run of my clutch, slow to grow, and I am the last of us still lingering at totem ranked. That is why I was chosen to be moved when the church needed dragons for its deployment. Now, my attitude and accomplishments have often pleased the goddess. But among my peers, I am seen as an underachiever at my age. That might diminish your respect for me, but the red dragon doesn't care about personal pride. Then there is Sholaha. I heard that the dwarves of Bara have gone there to fill an order for Carl. Something about blood. They should have it at your guild house soon. The Dark Dwarves hold a combat tournament along the shores of Naraledum Lake, and it doesn't even start until Overlord rank, which is the amateur fighters. The pros are all totem and mythic ranked. Carl was intrigued. What do they fight for? What sort of prizes would intrigue enough people to come fight in such a battle? The dragon laughed. They fight for the right to levy fees on the Xylaz dungeon. The winning mythic and totem-ranked fighter split half the income from the dungeon entry fees, with the city taking the rest. It probably sounds outlandish to you, coming from this region, but it's really not unexpected if you have lived long enough to see the change. The problem here in Drod is somewhat of their own making, after all. They went on a rampage to eliminate all the most powerful monsters and beasts. That dropped the latent mana level in the region, and now they are weakening themselves with their supposed safety. We have tried to talk sense to the Lord of Drod in the past, but he likes things just how they are, and this is his territory, so we let it go. Dana sighed. So that's how it is. But now that the system is back, aren't things going to be tossed on their heads? The dragon smiled at her. Unlike humans, who have zero innate power and unlimited potential for growth, almost every other species will hit a cap within the system where they cannot progress any further no matter what they do. Chromatic dragons need variable amounts of time, but they can reach demigod status, in theory. Though I am not certain the world could support a demigod at this point. We need higher quality mana to keep growing. But other than humans and dragons, everyone else will hit a genetic dead end. Even the elves and dwarves will reach their limits somewhere within the realms of the immortals. Few in the past did make it into the realm of peak immortals, but there has never been a supreme-ranked dwarf or elf. Once upon a time, the two species both had legendary heroes, but that was a gift from the system and they skipped the supreme rank entirely on their way by. But you're not here for history. What I'm saying is that from a logistical standpoint, it makes sense for you all to try to get to Overlord ranked within the next few years. I can see that the ladies are still new to the Monarch rank, but your power is growing. Earn enough rewards from the system and you'll make it there. It's not like you're short on time. With a fully active system, your aging process should slow dramatically once you're in your later 20s or the species equivalent of the human end of early adulthood. Chapter 9:19. Wait, how long? Lotus sighed at the thought of needing to make it through a whole rank to keep traveling. That was a long time. But she was pretty comfortable in Drod and they were all Darklight Host guild members now, so there was no reason that she couldn't just stay there forever if she didn't make it to Overlord rank quickly. The downside would be that if everyone else did, then she would miss out on too much fun stuff. If it was just Carl, she could get Ray and Remy to bring her back fun stuff. But losing her cuddle bear to separate adventures was simply unacceptable. Delilah noticed her dilemma right away. Let me guess, you're trying to balance the amount of actual work involved versus the amount of fun that you will miss out on if you don't do the work in a timely manner? The dragon asked. Lotus gave her a suspicious look but nodded in agreement. Delilah consoled the little cleric. Well, as they say, nature is all about balance, right? You just need to convince the other ladies to do fun stuff in between jobs so that you don't get too bored. I would likely just accept that you're going to lose the Beast Master eventually. His growth rate is destined to be spectacular and he will hit totem rank long before any of you are overlords. Dana patted Lotus on the shoulder. Relax, it's depressing for all of us. At least your bed doesn't get cold when he goes out to do other things. Ophelia chuckled at the comment and Dana shrugged. She had just accepted it at this point. Even if her and Carl weren't on the same sleeping schedule, if he was gone entirely, then all of her usual sleeping partners were gone as well. What are you going to do next? Ophelia asked the totem-ranked red dragon. There is another battle coming that I feel the calling to. Bagandorman is a coastal city right on the border. Close to 100,000 demons and orcs. The goddess says I need to be there for their next battle. She replied. Tessa stared meaningfully at Carl, who chuckled in response. Well, I suppose that we could all go to the city with you. It will make the red and black both happy if we're there to fight. The dragon shrugged. You can if you like. It is also a port town, so if you need some foreign items that you didn't find in Drod, they might be here. Carl looked up at the sky, which was becoming overcast as a storm rolled in from the east. Perhaps I should move most of the group to a dry spot and then I can follow you on Hawk. He suggested. Or I can just open a portal. I'm assuming that you've never been there before, but I learned to use the portal spell centuries ago. With a wave of her hand, a portal opened, showing a large city far beneath the scene. A minor technical difficulty for their wingless members. Carl opened the tiny world entrance to let the others enter and then walk through, letting himself walk through the sky as Hawk blinked to his space, then back out to appear under Carl's feet. Delilah transformed as she stepped through the portal and shook her head in amusement at Carl standing on top of the Thunderbird. I might have forgotten that you don't have wings. She informed him as they circled towards the city. That's fine. I can fly without them. But the others can't, so I opened a separate space for them to rest in. The reminder brought her attention back to the spell. Is there enough space to really relax in your spell? Or is it more of a stasis item? There is room. Is there not a good hotel here? Carl asked. Delilah shook her head. Even when the city isn't under attack, it's impossible to find a decent room. I suggest that we land outside the city and let the others out, then leave again before dark. Carl gestured down toward the army units stationed outside the city. Why don't we go join them? I can have a proper resting spot suitable for a high priestess made in no time at all. She was dubious about that but led Carl down to the army camps to make the introductions. She shifted into human form the moment that she landed on the east side of the city, furthest into Drod territory, and Carl let the rest of the team out of the tiny world while they waited for an officer to approach from the military camps. Avatar Delilah. What brings you here today? The demon asked politely as he spread his black leathery wings in a slight bow. I sense war coming. I also brought ones favored by the war god. Might we rest in your camp tonight? She asked. The demon suddenly went stiff and reluctantly shook his head. My apologies, priestess. The camps are on lockdown. There was an infection outbreak and it is suspected to have been brought by infiltrators from the city. We can help you set up near the camp but not allow you in until protocols are finished. Carl shrugged. That is fine. We will set up in the trees over there if you're not planning to cut them for firewood right away. The demon chuckled. We've got more than enough fire magic for that. We will make sure that the patrols keep an eye on your location so no spies or intruders attempt to attack your camp. Carl was about to thank the man when Ray simply vanished with a swoop of her cloak, using it as a shadow step into the tree line where she could set up a fort. Then they could upgrade the fort with illusionary domain, upgrades, and some runic traps. As long as Remy and the butterfly worked with her, it would be the greatest fort that they had ever made. But the butterfly had an even better idea. Instead of making the illusion inside the fort, she would make it outside the fort so that those who tried to get to them would have to go through hundreds of meters of fake forest without knowing where the forest had stopped being real. Chapter 920, Greatest Fort Ever. Carl smiled as the three of them got to work on the new camp, and Ray encompassed 5 large trees with her construction plans for the fortress, which was now more of a silk palace than a tree fort. All right, Lady Ray is ready to show us her masterpiece, Carl announced as she finished with the fort. He ignored the extra distance as he led the group inside, but noticed that Delilah was intrigued by all the illusionary elements. They were at overlord rank, but it was rare that anyone saw through them, even if they had a level advantage. Then they got to the silk fortress, which had 2 levels, multiple bedrooms, and even a slide around the outside to get to the ground. You keep that sort of equipment with you? That's a bit excessive. The dragon laughed. On the contrary, Lady Ray made this with her own silk over the last 5 minutes. It's a fully custom design with an improvised security system in place. I will add some runic wards around the perimeter to keep away pests, and then we should be able to sleep in peace. Butterfly passed control of the illusionary domain to Carl as her energy was limited, and he led everyone inside where Ray was waiting for them. Lady Delilah, welcome. Oh, I don't think that Naksha has seen one of my forts, either. First up, we have the seating area. The floor is stretchy and warm, but I also made hanging chairs. Over there, we have a kitchen, or will when Lotus makes counters out of the branches. Then we have showers, using water creating magical items. Upstairs we have a full set of bedrooms plus 1 extra, as we always seem to pick up more people the longer that we stay in one place. I remember a few occasions when our group size doubled by the time we were ready to move on. Ray welcomed them. The dragons explored the tent and then returned to the main floor where Lotus had altered the branches into countertops so she could make dinner. Hammocks in every room, sticky mesh on the windows to keep pests out but let fresh air in. Excellent work on the fort. Your team really does live in luxury when you're on the road. Delilah congratulated Rack. Ray gave her a toothy smile. We do our best. Do you think that this army will be as fun as the last one? There are a lot more strong creatures here. Maybe we can get more trophies this time. Skeletons and zombies don't make for decent trophies, and the necromancers don't look nearly as impressive dead as they were alive. Fighting giants at least left big, impressive corpses. The dragons chuckled at her annoyance. The undead generally weren't as impressive to look at dead as they were alive. They just kind of crumbled when the magic animating them vanished. Even the necromancers withered to something close to a mummy once the magic sustaining their life force was stripped away. For most of them had used the dark arts to extend their lives, and without that magic, they were nothing more than decrepit husks. Lotus made them lunch, and then they had a dilemma. What to do with the rest of the day? Ray grabbed the 2 dragons. Do you want to explore the separate space? Hawk is there flying around now, and you could stretch your wings without bothering anyone. Or have a nice bath in the lake in dragon form. Naksha looked intrigued. A bath in dragon form? That's not something that comes up very often. But how large is the space that it has a dragon-sized bathtub? Carl chuckled and opened the entrance far enough for them to step through and not just enough to keep the air fresh inside the space. That's... Delilah began. A tiny world, spell, yes. The totem-ranked dragon stepped through the entrance and then turned to look around in wonder. The entrance had put her at the entrance to the replica guild house where Remy was currently working on potions. Hawk was soaring overhead, enjoying the gusts off the mountains where the artificial sun's heat created an updraft. The 2 dragons transformed to soar around the space for a few minutes, then Delilah dove into the lake, vanishing from view for a few minutes before surfacing. Oh, that is lovely. The lake is much deeper than I thought it was going to be, and the depths are cold. There are actual fish in the lake. Naksha gasped as she dove in after the larger red dragon. Not many of them, but there were actual fish in the lake. They were introduced by Lotus as part of the effort to balance the ecosystems of the tiny world. It had been coming along remarkably well, and with the day/night cycle of the artificial sun, the plants were growing in well to replace the illusionary ones that Carl had created to fill the space. It was almost to the point now that they could keep a full group living in it indefinitely without having to open the exit at all, but Carl kept it cracked anyhow, just to be on the safe side. It was better to know that the air was good than to risk it becoming imbalanced without a good cause. Once they finished playing in the lake, the dragons stretched out on a rock ledge on the mountain at the edge of the space and simply enjoyed the sun. As far as ways to enjoy a down day went, that was close to the best, and there was nobody here who would bother or interrupt them. No threats to deal with, nobody begging for favors. Just peaceful relaxation in the sun. While most of the team relaxed in the tiny world, Carl sat in the fort and kept watch with Kara. Well, technically neither of them was doing a good job of keeping watch. Kara was snacking on trail mix from the guild storage, and Carl was reading a book on magical item creation. But they were at least inside the fort, where they would hear and sense if anyone approached the illusionary domain outside. Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.